Autumn leaves fell like fragments of broken memories in the Appalachian forest. Reynard, the red fox, with a coat the color of sunset, glided past ancient oak trunks like a shadow. The scar on his right paw, a reminder of a steel trap from 4 years ago, ached as the cold wind blew through. Winter was coming and hunger drove Reynard deeper into the woods. Then came that scent, the pungent smell of fresh blood mixed with fear. Not the scent of ordinary prey. Reynard followed the trail, and in a small clearing he found a bobcat kitten trembling under a low bush. Her hind leg bore a long, deep gash, blood still seeping into the green moss below. Before we dive into the story, please leave a comment below to let me know where in the world you're watching from today. The hunting instinct rose within him. The red fox moved closer, his body taut as a bow. But when he was just one step away from his prey, a breeze carried a special scent that made Rayer freeze. Pipe tobacco after shave, and the smell of pine. The scent of James. Memories suddenly returned. James, the silver-haired man with kind blue eyes, who had freed Reynard from that cruel trap, healed his wounds and fed him until he was strong enough to return to the wild. His scent, the scent of kindness and life, now lingered on this tiny bobcat kitten. The bobcat kitten looked at Reynard with large blue eyes filled with terror. Around her neck was a thin black collar with a small device attached, saturated with James's scent. Not a passing smell, but one deeply embedded, as if James's hands had just touched it, adjusted it with his characteristic dedication. Reynard sat down, hunger still knowing, but a stronger emotion rising. James had saved his life when no one else would. Now a creature bearing his mark lay before him, weak and in need of help. The sun had begun to set. With his decision made, Reynard approached the injured bobcat. Despite the kitten's attempt to defend herself with a weak hiss and undeveloped claws, Reynard patiently examined the wound. A deep cut perhaps from an encounter with another animal or something sharp in the forest. As he sniffed the collar again, Reynard seemed to understand the whole story. James had placed this GPS device on the bobcat kitten as part of his conservation research. This kitten was as special to James as Reynard once was. Night was falling, and an injured bobcat kitten would hardly survive. With sudden determination, Reynard gripped the kitten's scruff gently in his jaws and lifted her. The kitten mewed weakly, but had no strength to resist. James's research station was 30 miles away across hills and valleys. The journey would be long and challenging, but Reynard knew it was the only way to save the kitten, and perhaps the only way to repay the man who had once saved his life. That first night, they sheltered in a hollow tree. Reynard curled around the kitten, warming the trembling little creature. In the dim moonlight, the red fox studied his new traveling companion, a bobcat not even 4 months old. Her tawny fur with distinctive spots and facial markings, still too thin to withstand the harsh winter ahead. As the bobcat kitten fell into an exhausted sleep, Reynard remained awake, listening to the night forest. Hunger had subsided, replaced by a strange feeling he had never experienced before. A sense of purpose, of responsibility. For the first time since leaving James's care, Reynard felt he was doing something right. In her sleep, the bobcat kitten nestled closer to Reynard, seeking warmth. The red fox gently licked the wound on her leg, cleaning the dried blood, just as James had once done for his wound. Outside, an owl hooted in the darkness, and Reynard knew tomorrow would be a long day. Dawn awakened Reynard with a fiercer hunger after a night without food. The bobcat kitten still slept soundly, her breathing weak but steady. The wound had stopped bleeding but remained swollen and red. She needed food to recover. The red fox quietly left the hollow tree. Soon after, he returned with 2 field mice and a nestling. Though starving, Reynard ate just 1 mouse, carrying the rest in his mouth back to the tree. The bobcat kitten was awake, huddled in the darkest corner. When Reynard placed the food down and backed away, the kitten slowly approached, never taking her eyes off the red fox, and began to eat ravenously. When finished, her gaze was still wary, but now held a spark of curiosity, perhaps gratitude. With a soft growl, Reynard signaled it was time to continue their journey. This time, when he gripped her scruff, there was no resistance. The next 3 days were a relentless battle against weather and terrain. They traversed dense forest with thorny bushes and vines, where Renard's jaw gradually ached from carrying his precious burden. They sheltered through a rainy night in a rock cave, where the Bobcat Kitten voluntarily curled up beside Reynard to sleep for the first time. They faced an open field where a white-tailed eagle nearly made them its meal if Renard hadn't leaped into a thorny bush, accepting painful scratches to protect his small friend. Each day, the bond between them deepened. The Bobcat Kitten, whom Renard began to think of as Aurora from the scent on her collar, grew stronger, sometimes able to walk short distances on her own. During these moments, Renard adjusted his pace, patiently waiting for Aurora to catch up, then gently taking her scruff again when she tired. On the third night, in a shallow cave by a stream, Renard was licking the wounds caused by thorns when Aurora unexpectedly approached and began licking a scratch on the fox's foreleg, mimicking the care she had received. Reynard froze in surprise. No creature had tended to his wounds since James had done so. A warm feeling spread throughout his body as the red fox gently rubbed his head against the kitten, and for the first time, Aurora responded with a friendly little mew. On the fourth day, a final challenge stood before them. A large, swift-flowing stream, the last boundary before reaching James's research station. The sun was nearly setting when they found a fallen log spanning the stream. Reynard set Aurora down, observing the moss-covered, slippery log. Aurora seemed to understand the situation. She took a few steps, testing her injured leg that had grown stronger. Renard stepped onto the log first, moving carefully step by step, then looked back at the kitten. Aurora took a deep breath, then stepped on, slow but determined. Step by step, they crossed the stream. When Aurora slipped, Renard immediately turned back, ready to help, but she regained her balance and continued walking. When both safely reached the other shore, Reynard felt a strange pride, not for himself, but for Aurora and her courage. That night, they slept under pine trees, just a few miles from James's research station. James's scent was now stronger than ever, not just from Aurora's collar, but from the forest itself. This was territory James frequently traversed. As moonlight filtered through the branches, Reynard watched Aurora sleeping beside him. A strange feeling rose within, not joy at completing his mission, but sadness at the impending separation. Aurora would return to James where she belonged, and Renard would return to his solitary life in the deep forest. The red fox gently licked the sleeping kitten's head, a gesture of farewell. The Bobcat Kitten shivered slightly in her sleep, unconsciously snuggling deeper against Renard, seeking familiar warmth. Renard suddenly realized this journey had changed him in ways he couldn't explain. For the first time since leaving James's care, he had felt something beyond basic survival instincts: friendship, responsibility, and perhaps in an animal way, love. Tomorrow the journey would end. But tonight, under the moonlight, Reynard allowed himself to enjoy the warm feeling of friendship, of connection that he had never known before. The dawn of the fifth day awakened Reynard with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. James's research station was in sight, a small wooden cabin with a wide porch and a fenced garden, all situated in a clearing in the forest. The Bobcat Kitten also awoke, and upon seeing the cabin, she tensed unexpectedly. James's scent perhaps triggered memories, but accompanying it was the smell of many other humans, an alien and frightening scent for a wild creature. Renard and Aurora hid in the bushes, observing the cabin from a distance. Occasionally, people came and went, James and others dressed alike, perhaps colleagues in the research project. Talking and machinery sounds echoed from the cabin, unnatural sounds that made both animals alert. All morning they observed from a safe distance. Reynard tried to find the best time to bring the kitten close to the cabin without being detected. He didn't want to risk encountering humans other than James. When the sun was high, everyone seemed to leave the cabin to work in the forest. Only James remained, sitting on the porch with a steaming mug. This was their opportunity. Reynard turned to Aurora, his eyes conveying a wordless message. The Bobcat Kitten looked back at the fox, then toward the cabin, seeming to understand their journey was ending. She rubbed her head against Renard's neck, an affectionate gesture previously unseen. Renard gripped her scruff one last time, careful not to hurt her, and began moving out of the forest edge. He moved cautiously, keeping his distance from the cabin, but close enough for James to see if he looked carefully. Reaching a small clearing about 50 yards from the cabin, Renard gently placed Aurora on the ground and licked her face one last time, their scents now intermingled after days together. The Bobcat Kitten stood still, looking at Renard with blue eyes filled with emotions impossible to name. She was no longer fearful or suspicious, only attached and reluctant to part. She gently bit Renard's ear, a playful gesture between friends. Renard gave a soft growl, urging the kitten toward the cabin, but Aurora didn't move, still standing beside the red fox. Renard tried backing up a few steps toward the forest, but the kitten followed. The red fox was confused. How could he explain to the kitten that this was her home, where she would be cared for and safe? How could he say goodbye to the only friend he had ever had? While Renard was hesitating, a voice rang out from the cabin. "Aurora, is that you?" Aurora. James had seen them. He stood up from his chair, eyes wide with surprise. Aurora. That must be the Bobcat Kitten's name. Renard's instinct urged him to flee, to disappear into the deep forest, and never return. But he froze in place, eyes not leaving James, the man who had saved his life, who had taught him what kindness was. James slowly moved toward them, careful not to make sudden movements. He stopped a few yards away, kneeling down. "Aura," he called gently. "Where have you been, little one? We've been looking everywhere for you." The Bobcat Kitten, Aurora, heard the familiar voice, but didn't leave Reynard's side. James looked from Aurora to Reynard, and his eyes widened as he recognized the red fox. "It can't be," he whispered. "Is it you?" Reynard tensed, ready to run. But then a gentle breeze brought James's scent, the scent deeply embedded in his memory, the scent that had guided him throughout this long journey, the scent of safety, of kindness. James slowly reached toward his pocket and took something out, a piece of jerky. He placed it on the ground between them. "It is you, isn't it?" he said, voice filled with emotion. "You brought Aurora back. You found her and brought her home." Aurora finally moved, limping toward James, but continually looking back at Reynard as if unwilling to leave her new friend. When she reached James, the Bobcat Kitten allowed him to gently examine her healing wound. "She's been cared for," James muttered, surprised. "Who?" He looked up, met Renard's eyes, and understood. "You took care of her." Renard still stood motionless, torn between the desire to flee and the longing to stay. He had completed his mission, repaid his debt. Now he should return to the wildlife where he belonged. But as he turned to leave, Aurora suddenly left James and limped quickly toward Reynard, emitting small, anxious calls. The kitten blocked Reynard's path, rubbing her head against the red fox's leg, as if begging him not to go. James watched this scene with astonished and moved eyes. "I've never seen anything like it," he said softly. "Two predators, becoming friends." He slowly moved closer, still kneeling to appear less threatening. "You brought Aurora home," he said to Reynard, "and now perhaps you should stay too." Reynard tensed, not understanding James's intention. Stay. A wild fox couldn't live with humans. James seemed to read Reynard's thoughts. "Not in the house," he explained, "but this area is safe. No hunters, no traps. We protect wildlife here." He pointed toward an area near the forest edge. "There's an old rock den over there. Nobody uses it. Far enough for you to have your own space, but close enough to visit if you want." Aurora mwed again, still rubbing against Reynard's leg. The red fox looked down at his small friend, then up at James. Two beings who had changed his life in different ways. A wild fox couldn't live with humans, but perhaps a wild fox could live near humans he trusted. Perhaps he could have a place to return to, a connection to the world outside the deep forest. Reynard slowly sat down, still staring at James. He didn't run away. Not now. James smiled, understanding the meaning of that gesture. "Thank you," he said softly, "for bringing Aurora home, and welcome home yourself." Aurora, understanding Reynard wouldn't leave, became so excited she tried to jump up, but her injured leg made her fall. Reynard immediately moved to support her with his muzzle, and James laughed at the sight. "You both need proper care," he said. "Aura needs her wound bandaged, and you, old friend, Look like you haven't eaten properly in a week." James slowly stood him back toward the cabin. "I'll prepare some food. You can come closer when you feel comfortable." As James returned to the cabin, Renard and Aurora still stood together at the edge of the clearing. The midday sun illuminated the forest, and for the first time since beginning the journey, Renard felt all burdens lifted. He looked down at Aurora, and the Bobcat Kitten looked back with bright blue eyes, happy. A gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of James, of Aurora, and now of Reynard himself, all blending into a new scent. The scent of a strange family forming. Reynard licked Aurora's head once more, and together they began slowly moving toward the cabin where James was waiting. A year later, when autumn leaves once again fell on the Appalachian forest, Swing James sat on the porch drinking his morning coffee. Aurora, now much larger, but still retaining the playfulness of a young bobcat, curled beside him. The wound on her leg had healed completely, leaving only a small scar barely visible under her thick fur. From the forest edge, a movement caught their attention. Reynard appeared, no longer the shy shadow of before. The red fox now confidently stepped out of the forest darkness, his coat brilliant in the autumn sunlight. But Reynard wasn't alone. Following him were 3 fox kits, wobbling and curious, leaving the safe rock den where they were born for the first time. Aurora immediately jumped down from the porch, excitedly running toward the fox family. Reynard stopped, waiting while his offspring looked at Aurora with curiosity and slight apprehension. James slowly stood up, smiling at this incredible scene. He had lived with nature his whole life, but had never witnessed anything like this. A bobcat and a fox family greeting each other like old friends. Aurora carefully approached the fox kits, licking their heads as Reynard had once done for her. The kits initially backed away, but after seeing their father didn't object, they began curiously sniffing the strange bobcat. Reynard looked at James, and in that moment a wordless message passed between man and beast, a message of gratitude, of trust, and of an unbreakable bond. James nodded slightly to Renard, understanding the red fox was introducing his new family, sharing his joy with those he considered part of this strange pack. As the fox kits began playing with Aurora on the grass, Renard slowly moved toward James. He stopped a few steps away, not too close to feel threatened, but close enough to show trust. "You've done well," James said softly. "We both have." Reynard looked at James for a long moment, then slowly closed his eyes, a gesture of absolute peace. When he opened them, the golden light in the fox's eyes seemed to shine brighter in the autumn sunlight. A gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of all of them, James, Aurora, Reynard, and his offspring, all blending into a familiar scent. The scent of family, of connection beyond the boundaries between species. And in that perfect moment, under the warm autumn sun, Reynard knew he had found what he didn't know he was looking for. A place to call home, a family to return to, and a familiar scent that would always guide him no matter where he went in this vast forest.